Welcome back to part 2 of our lecture series here with Professor Brent Williams here at the Apartment Academy in your ongoing pursuit of your degree in multifamily science. Last time we talked about what's happening in multifamily with respect to maintenance, staff, and how you can try to do more with less. Today we're going to talk, generally speaking, about what's happening in the multifamily industry with respect to staff shortfalls and retention. It's really giving operators a headache right now. And Brent's group over there at Multifamily Insiders did a survey that is really shedding some light on what's really at the core of what might be causing your folks to leave your company. So stand by if you want to learn more about that. Okay, well, welcome back. This is part 2 of our lecture series here with Professor Williams, talking about some of the highlights of recent discussions over at the Multifamily Insiders. And we talked just a little bit about maintenance and how there's a shortage of maintenance workers right now and how you can do more with less. But there is, just generally speaking, a crunch in our industry surrounding hiring. Certainly maintenance, but it extends, I think, all the way up and down the food chain. And Multifamily Insiders did did some research on this and published a great report. And I think this would be great to talk about, Brent. So talk a little bit about what you guys discovered that's happening out there.
We have a ton of takeaways we found in this research. You know, I think we've done research studies for years on different topics, from marketing to staffing to leasing, budget issues. This one, I think, might have been the most illuminating to really get into the minds of how people view their jobs and if they're satisfied and what's really driving them to either stay or leave. It is really interesting to just see their bare souls out in their responses on what their satisfaction level is in multifamily.
This was this tell us a little bit how you did the research. Was this a survey, anonymous survey? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Right. Yeah. So survey, they can enter their information, but we never publish it just for distribution purposes. And yeah, we push it out and try to get people from both the employer side as well as the employee side to understand their both perspectives. And we'll talk about this today, but what you'll find is that the perspectives don't always match. So what the employers are thinking is important, it may be true to some degree, but it's only part of the story. And I have reason to believe they're not actually being told the whole truth by their employees. And I'll talk about that in a second.
Okay, so let's start with just top down. Where are the areas that the industry is seeing the most difficulty in recruiting?
Sure, yeah. So we saw that the number one difficulty, let's say this, the number one job title that companies are understaffed with is maintenance. That should be no surprise to anybody. We had it clocked in at 77% of companies were short-staffed in maintenance, and which is interesting because as we talked last episode, Mark Kokoro had he tagged it at 75%. So it's just right in line. We're gonna see a lot of convergences with what Mark was saying in his webinar on being short-staffed in maintenance to what we saw in our separate research. The top 3 positions, difficulty in positions to fill were maintenance techs, maintenance supervisors, and then porters. And then the fourth, I believe, was leasing consultants. It was the top 3 were all maintenance related.
So 77% reported they were short on the maintenance side. How about, so the fourth role you mentioned, leasing, what was the percent of companies that reported they were short staffed on leasing?
I believe it was 57%.
Yeah, so still pretty significant. More than half of companies are impacted in both of those areas. So there's been a lot of talk about the Great Resignation and people working from home impacting certain industries. That probably is not one of the factors happening here, at least on the maintenance side. Like no maintenance guy that was, out in the field here is now working from home, and even if he's left the industry. Why are people leaving then?
So there's different ways to look at this. So what we did is we asked employers what were their exit surveys telling them, and on their exit surveys they told us that the number one reason was pay. Then, and actually, I take it back. This is not number one. This is what we, in general, we saw on those results. It wasn't exactly a number, but it was kind of like we saw the most is pay, and then we saw a lot on better opportunity, and then less stress. But pay was clearly, if you look at the results, the response they gave us, pay was clearly what they were seeing the most in exit surveys. Now, what's really interesting is we're going to see a divergence between what they're seeing in their exit surveys and what the team members are seeing when they talk about why they are considering possibly leaving. And we'll get to that in just a bit. Before we do that, what the employers are doing is they're taking that data and they're saying, okay, so now we feel that they're leaving because of pay. And so we asked them, well, what are you doing now? What are you doing to incentivize more applications? And they are doing kind of what you anticipate. They're increasing pay. They're doing hiring bonuses. So 2 pay related items. Something else I want to read real quick. They said they tried to advertise the company like we would advertise a property or apartment. Give reasons to work for XYZ apartments, not the job description and qualifications. I think that is so amazing. I think that is exactly what companies need to do. If you look at job listings, you'll see they are very much focused on weeding out people. They're like, well, how can we, here's your job responsibilities and here's the things that you need to have in order to apply. It's not focused on why should you be working for us? It's not aspirational. It's not, hey, this is an amazing place to work. Now, some companies do it better than others, obviously. And sometimes you'll see that type of language on their website. They'll have like a career section. It kind of goes into that. But if you look at the syndicated job postings that they're sending out on Indeed or wherever, you're not seeing that type of messaging. It's still focused on weeding people out versus trying to lure them in, which is a completely different approach to getting more job seekers. And one more thing, and this kind of ties back to our last podcast when we were talking about Mark Cookro's event. Somebody said they're offering sign-on bonuses for certain positions, now offering toolkits for maintenance-related positions. So again, trying to say, hey, come work for us. You got to bring your own tools. I mean, that's just not going to work a lot of times, especially if these people don't have experience. They're trying to get these people into the industry. They're not going to have a whole tool, all these tools already ready for them. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think the industry was content for a long time to be perceived as and to act as a commodity, in that the people themselves didn't really matter. We were, we collected the rent, we turned the wrench, and we did our job, and the person behind it didn't really matter that much. But now that we're having trouble attracting qualified, dedicated people to work for our companies, I think now you don't have that luxury anymore. And we hear on the Apartment Academy, when we have operators come in and talk about what makes them different, what I think we would have heard 5 or 10 years ago is attention to your NOI, and we understand we have market domain knowledge, and now it's not that. It is we have the most amazing people. We are a people first culture. People. Like, there is some growing recognition that has been accelerated, I think, by COVID and the Great Resignation. That now people have to pay attention to that stuff. But it's not pervasive yet, but you are seeing it more often. I completely agree. Property management companies are now talking about culture in a way they never did. Not that long, 5 years ago, you never would have heard property management companies talking about culture. I think, and it's a really good thing for the employees, because recognition that culture matters is the first step in making a better way of life for the people that work for you.
Yeah, it's hard to create, resident experience has also taken hold, and it's hard to create a great resident experience when you don't have a great company culture and an employee experience. If we treat our communities like commodities, we end up hiring, like you were saying. I love the way you put that. Like we have commodities as apartments, and then we end up treating our team members like commodities at the same time. And now it's becoming much more fleshed out as far as that experience goes. I love that.
Yeah. So you're seeing a switch in talking. People are now trying to attract talent by talking about the quality of the company and the culture of the company.
Well, I'll say though that was a kind of a one-off comment. The vast majority of comments that we were seeing were still pay related, and don't get me wrong, pay is still, we're still struggling in that respect from a industry perspective, but that is the, as far as we can tell, that is still the go-to number one approach to acquiring new talent, is addressing the pay issue. And there's others that are just kind of scratching around at the
any other approaches that companies talked about to how they're sort of band-aiding around this problem?
So another question we asked, and it kind of refers to this, is we asked, has staffing shortages led you to centralize more of your on-site team functions? And I was actually shocked by this number. 51% said yes, where, I mean, my goodness, it wasn't that long ago that would have been just single digits as far as centralization goes. We've been talking about it for a long time, about this idea that some of these functions shouldn't maybe necessarily be done on site, especially when you get into the assistant property management role. That not only does it make more sense to having some of those functions be centralized, but it also creates a much more logical career path. When historically we've gone from leasing consultant to assistant property manager to property manager, you're shifting gears from a sales role to a kind of a bookkeeping role, and it makes no sense. And so by taking some of those tasks and centralizing them, that's really, I mean, it's been on the tongues of our industry for a long time, but we've never really seen that progression until now. And another, I just had a conversation a few days ago with somebody who was saying that there's also a trend that they're seeing as far as pulling away the customer experience, customer service roles and the sales roles. In our history, we've always kind of said, oh, we're a jack of all trades. And it's been a kind of a, people always think that's a good thing, right? Well, now it's kind of like that pulling apart of those two roles. And then when you have your sales roles pulled apart, then you can centralize that potentially if you have several properties in a given area where they can go and meet prospects by appointment at these different locations. And then you have your, you fine tune your sales process for those salespeople who are going to different properties. And hypothetically, then it gives them a different view every day. So they're not at the same property every day. They get to kind of hop around, and that may lead to, higher job satisfaction. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that was kind of in the conversation.
Yes. And what the rise of virtual leasing, which was a necessity at one point during COVID, while people were isolated, has really opened our eyes to the fact that as an industry, we used to be very locked into this idea that that people needed to connect personally with a person on site in order to lease a unit at that apartment. We used to say, we're selling people, not the apartment, right? People rent from people. They don't rent because of the apartment. But it turns out that might not actually be true, and that certainly for Class B and C assets where maybe there's not an expectation of luxurious, catered living, that if you can display a unit virtually with the amenities and give them the information that they need about that property and that unit without having it be in person, that people will lease, and they will lease at market rents. You don't have to give a discount because they didn't meet with a person, and that has also opened the door to this what you were saying, this centralization of the leasing function, which is very interesting. Now that we'll have to see what the net impact of the industry is, but what I would hope is that, number one, that leaves more budget for the maintenance guys, because you're not replacing them, and they need to be better compensated for the job that they do. And secondly, I think maybe this is kind of what you were alluding to, splintering off kind of the customer service component of what's always been embedded into both the leasing agent and the community manager or assistant manager. Just the customer service piece could be centralized as well. And now you can make room for somebody who's dedicated to that. Maybe they're shared between multiple properties, but it's somebody whose expertise is dealing with angry, irate people, and which unfortunately is a big part of the job. So both of those things, I think, would help make our industry a little bit better as those are adopted.
Absolutely. I mean, we just had what was it? We had to do so many different things like blogs and webinars and whatnot. There was a question about how many different tasks or how many different systems do our on-site teams have to deal with? And it kind of relates to tasks as well. Like, it's amazing how many systems there are right now, and they're trying to juggle all these things. And being a jack of all trades is becoming almost impossible from that perspective. When I was on site, I was, creating leases, and even at the time I thought, well, this is just crazy that I would be creating my own leases, because creating a lease is not in the wheelhouse of somebody who does great customer service, and is not in the wheelhouse of somebody who does great sales. Neither of those. And so there are things that we can absolutely get more specified skill sets involved and making a better experience.
So you teased us a little that the companies were thinking, hey, this is all about pay. It sounds like you learned something different.
Yes. And so this is really interesting. Let me walk through a few things that we learned, and we'll get to the meat of it. So the first thing is we asked, how, please rate how you're feeling about the following aspects of your job. Okay. And one of the things that we noticed was, and I think that if anybody listening right now, they've seen enough Amazon reviews, there's different ways the data, you can visualize the data, right? And so sometimes you have a product that has, the highest ratings are at 5, and then it has a slow, consistent progression down to 1 rating. So hopefully it's a good product. It has the most ratings that are 5, and then as you get down to 1, there's not that many. Sometimes you'll see though, there is starts at high ratings at 5, and then it goes down, but then there's an uptick when you get to the 1, which means that people have a very, very strong opinion, both either positive or negative. And we found 3 different categories that had that kind of the strongest looking, graph that looked like that. And that was company culture, corporate management, and resident interactions. So, and so for some of those categories, the rating for very negative was 17 to 20%, which is pretty high. So we're seeing things, and company culture, corporate management, and resident interactions, none of those are pay, right? And so then what we did is we cross-referenced. Actually, let me back up. We asked people, how likely are you to leave your job in the next year? Okay. 13% said very likely, 26% said somewhat likely, 61% said not likely. Okay, so 39% said somewhat or very likely to leave. We cross-referenced that with these different aspects of having a job in property management. And we found that for those who are most likely to leave in the next year, here were the lowest rated satisfaction levels for these three different things: corporate management, career advancement opportunities, and corporate culture. The fourth was pay. So pay was still an issue. So don't get me wrong thinking that, oh, we're okay if we fix these other things, we don't have to pay. We still have to pay more in this industry.
Yeah.
However, pay was not in the top three of issues. And let's go back in time. Let's talk about what those exit surveys, what we saw from that. Again, this is not, the exit surveys wasn't a percentage response, but what we saw most was pay was the top thing we saw. And then when they were talking about what am I going to do to get more applications, I'm going to pay more and do hiring bonuses. So there's a disconnect in how corporate is seeing what the issue is versus people are seeing what their issues are. And it's very possible that when people are doing exit surveys, that they're not feeling comfortable with saying that their biggest issues are with corporate management and company culture, for example, because that's not something comfortable to talk about. But pay might be comfortable, but companies are definitely getting the wrong perspective on what might the issue be, at least from what we saw in this study. So there's a lot of issues that the companies need to work on that are completely outside of pay that they may not be looking at right now.
Do you have any color on what that means, corporate management? Like, or have you had anyone talk about what that means?
To a certain degree, people identify what they think it means of themselves. You put out a survey, and we don't give like a definition necessarily, so it can be different for every single person. I would imagine that it's a disconnect between the on-site teams and their goals and their communication with corporate management, and that they're not either feeling supported. There's a lot of different things it could mean, but it's definitely a disconnect with corporate management.
In my experience, that and I've heard this, when I'm on your webinars, there's a active, vibrant chat that's usually happening at the same time people are talking about the speaker, participating actively with the speaker, saying, elaborating further. And I have seen a theme, and you have, I would say, you obviously would know better than me, but my impression is that the folks that are on those webinar Wednesdays, 80% of them are in the field, are on site at properties probably. And so I've seen dialogue from them surrounding this matter, the disconnect between what corporate thinks is happening in the field and what's actually happening in the field. And I think what I think the biggest issue is that folks at the corporate level have not always been in the field, and the perception of what's happening and the overwhelming amount of things that the folks in the field have to juggle does not translate up to the corporate level, and so there's a misunderstanding. There's not enough support provided to the folks on site in terms of, not having the right tool, not having the right software, not having the right training, because the cart goes down the road, right? And people rent no matter, and sometimes irrespective of the good or bad job that the corporate seems to be doing, and yet the people are suffering under all of that. And you don't always have a corporate culture that supports those people speaking up and saying something about it. Not always. Although I'll say the flip side of that, which is if I put my software hat on, for years, or especially early on, trying to sell technology into the business, one thing that we did hear quite often is that that corporate staff were reticent to do anything that might upset folks in the field. Like, change management to them was really hard because they did not want to upset the apple cart. But that's like sort of treating these folks with kid gloves in a way they don't need to. They need to be engaged. They want people to try to make their lives easier. They want to, I think they want to be challenged. They want to do a good job. Everybody that's in this business cares a lot about their job. You couldn't stand it otherwise. If you really didn't care about what you're doing and the people that you were serving at those properties, you could never stay in this business more than 1 week. So you have people that deeply care about what they're doing, but corporate doesn't always know how to support them, I think, or is sort of too scared to get out there and kind of stir things up and try to make things better because status quo is better than somebody turning in their resignation.
And kind of building on what you were saying, even if they were on site, it's changed so much in the past 5 years. I mean, I've worked on site and my experience is just so unrelated to what people go through right now. Because there's so many more things going on. There's so many things that have juggled. The residents are much angrier now than they used to be because the world is a challenging place right now. And so I think that it's very easy to lose sight of or not understand really what on-site teams are facing. And in fact, I was trying to bring it up real quick. So I did a poll on, I think, the multifamily share space that asked how ambitious community members were in multifamily with a range from 1 to 5. And I really want to get a sense for like how people are, raring to go in multifamily in their own career. But something kind of took a tangent on that poll because I left the ability to add your own option, okay? And somebody wrote in an option that says, used to be ambitious, but the industry isn't as rewarding as it used to be. And now that poll question wasn't an initial poll question. So it got added later, which means that not everybody saw it initially when they had the chance to answer the poll. Even though it got added later, 24% of people ended up answering that response. That's not as rewarding as it used to be. I think, frankly, multifamily is challenging, and multifamily has a lot of things that you have to deal with that are not fun, but there's always some excitement, always something that draws people into multifamily and keeps them there. But there's a concern that balance is shifting so that people like the benefit, the interesting part of multifamily is no longer outweighing the challenges of multifamily. That's a scary thing.
What do you think, Brent? I'm going to just ask your opinion. Do you think that, I know we're running short on time, but and this has been great stuff, and I want you to wrap up with any suggestions you have for especially on the corporate side, people that are listening on how to address this. But I'm curious, do you think the residents in multifamily buildings could ultimately be happy engaging with an Alexa type device rather than a person? Like, is that where we're going, do you think, Brent?
Great question. I think that if it is truly seamless, where I think the challenge is it may be impossible to be truly seamless. I was we were playing, my in-laws and myself were planning on a trip to Disney, and my mother-in-law got so fed up with her phone that she literally threw it. She just chucked it, right? Because it was so frustrating. Now, that's a trip to Disney, and it's all, it's there's a lot that goes into it. It's very stressful to plan something like that. But, somebody's home is also very stressful, right? Because it's where they live. You don't want things to go wrong. So you don't want somebody chucking the Alexa because, they're not getting the responses. So I think that there's possibilities. I think as long as you have fallback options, that if you can get the more real-time answers so that people want, in fact, this actually has a correlation to how I started Multifamily Insiders, because I still think that there's a lot of value in going to your local association, learning from people, direct face-to-face, that sort of thing, right? But when I got into the industry, I wanted immediate response. I wanted to go look up the answers and get that, understand the industry without having to wait or go to somewhere else. Same kind of concept, right?
Yeah.
You want to have that immediacy. Mm-hmm. And so in that respect, having better technology options has that more immediacy, where it's a not only does it replace somebody, but it is a better job than a physical person does. I do wonder at some point though, will people ever just want to not need that personal touch? I know that one of the friction points, I believe, on site is that when somebody moves into the community, and going back to what you said as far as people move in because they like the person just as much as they like the community, right? They form that bond with that leasing consultant. That leasing consultant eventually leaves. And hardly any communities that I know of have a really good response plan on how to reestablish that relationship with that resident. Because I remember when I was, living at a community, I would go for a maintenance request. I'd go in, I'd talk to them, and I'd say, and my person was gone, right? And so my connection with the community was gone. Now, granted, now I probably would put all my maintenance requests in, and so I wouldn't need that relationship anymore. So it's a good question. Like at some point, we just don't need that at all. I really can't, I couldn't say. I don't know what people will end up. I'm not a good prognosticator of those types of things. So who knows?
Well, you're the amalgamator of a lot of conventional wisdom here in the business. So you have as good a shot as anyone to tell the tea leaves. All right. Anything else from that was to be learned from the survey? Suggestions you have for people that are listening today, operators that you could glean from the information you guys gathered?
Something just came up on Multifamily Insiders, and I apologize, I cannot remember the author's name, but it just came to me that she was talking about how many having companies do stay interviews, and I did a LinkedIn poll on it on our we have a Multifamily Insiders LinkedIn group, and I haven't gone back to look at those responses, but I think a lot of people don't do a lot of stay interviews, and that might be something they want to do, go into and you're doing exit interviews because you want to find out what went wrong, but why wait? Why not do periodic interviews and it's not the review. The review is fundamentally different than doing a stay interview to understand what they're happy with, what the company, how it's maybe missing the boat on keeping our team members happy and engaged with their companies. So I thought that was a wonderful idea. And if you go, if people are on this soon, they can just look up multifamilyinsiders.com, and it's in the blogs area for some great ideas there.
Great. I love that. I think also I would add, if you're not surveying your employees on a regular basis, there's a lot of great tools now to facilitate that. You should do that. You've had Swift Money, folks from Swift Money, on Webinar Wednesday, they do that. So if you're not surveying your employees regularly, you're missing out on these insights. It's nice to have Brent here to do the hard work for you, but you should be asking your own people, what's important to them, how they perceive your company culture. So that would be, I guess that's my suggestion to arrange this. So, well, Brent, all good stuff. Keep up the good work. We can't wait to have you back again, to come back for season 3 and share more wisdom from the collective wisdom that's shared with you guys out there. Thanks, Brent.
I love doing this. This is fantastic. So we have a new research report coming out every couple months. So we have some more data coming in, and just kind of the thumb on the community on what people are talking about. There's always interesting discussions going on. So I love to kind of share what the community is talking about.
All right. So we'll find you on Facebook where?
On Multifamily Share Space is our Facebook group, and there's tons of conversations there. It's fantastic.
Yes. And then we find you on the website where?
Yes, multifamilyinsiders.com. And we have tons of blog resources, discussion resources. The front page has posting on there too. We also, if you go to the files, there's a link at the very top. Files, you can get access to that survey report that I was talking about being short-staffed. It's free for anybody who's a member. It's free to become a member. So if you go to the top of the page, there's like files and tools link. Go there and you can see we have hundreds of resources available for people.
Great. One of the jewels of the industry. Brent, thank you for joining us today. All good stuff. Look forward to next time.
Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for part 2 of our lecture here at the Apartment Academy with Professor Brent Williams. I hope you enjoyed that. We appreciate you logging in and listening. And if you've enjoyed these podcasts and you feel like your management company could use a little advice from some of the professors here at the Apartment Academy, then go to our website, apartmentacademy.com, and click Help Me. We'll send you a questionnaire and provide individualized responses to your answers at no charge that I guarantee will offer you insights on ways you can immediately improve apartment operations. I hope you took good notes today. The only test you'll take awaits you at the trials and tribulations there at your local leasing office. See you next time.